Friends, today on Belonging in Classrooms, I am so excited to welcome two of Minneapolis Public Schools' amazing parent leaders, Claire and Anna, who came on the podcast to really talk about the importance of this district, Minneapolis Public Schools, passing the gender inclusion policy that just happened at this last board meeting. But more than that, we're really going to talk about their journey and their experiences with having children in our district and the experiences that they went through, how they learned how to advocate, the bumps along the way, and really the amount of work that it took. And I just personally want to express my deep gratitude to Claire and Anna, both for their leadership in working so hard to push and nudge our district to do this very necessary work of gender inclusion, and also for the example that they led to me along the way, for their hours of hard work and meetings and time spent on Zooms. And it was such a privilege and honor to get to watch them both speak at the school board meetings multiple times that I was so excited today to have them and for you to learn more about their advocacy, their why, their advice, their teachings, their learnings. You're going to learn so much today on Belonging in Classrooms. Claire and Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Can you just start by telling us, introduce yourselves, who are you and why are you in Minneapolis Public Schools?
Yeah, so my name is Claire. I use she, her pronouns. I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are in school. One has yet to be in school. Minneapolis resident. My partner's a Minneapolis educator. Proud to be in Minneapolis Public Schools.
Yeah, my name is Anna L. I use she, they pronouns. And I have a first grader in Minneapolis Public Schools. I, live in Minneapolis and I believe in public schools. So that's why we're here.
That's so amazing. So talk about the gender inclusion policy we could celebrate it, and it's also super annoying that it just passed. Right?
Yes.
Let's
Yes,
be
to all
real.
of that.
It's both of those things, all of those things. So talk about what it is and why it was important to you.
So my oldest kid, who just finished 3rd grade, so an incoming 4th grader, is a transgender non-binary individual who welcomed us into their identity when they were in kindergarten. And so this has been something that I have been trying on a school level since they were in kindergarten. Which really kind of led me to believe that we can't do this at a school level and it needs to be a district level.
So in other words, you were hitting some resistance.
Oh, so much resistance. So much resistance, so much kind of misinformation, so much misunderstanding, so much, I don't want to say negligence, but just really, really poor reactions to some very basic needs.
I'll say negligence.
You will?
Well,
yeah, say
my
more.
child started at a different school. So I'm relatively...
In Minneapolis Public Schools.
In Minneapolis Public Schools. I'm relatively new to Minneapolis. I've lived here for 2 years. My child also welcomed us into their non-binary, gender expansive identity in kindergarten. And at the initial school where my child was, they were physically violently attacked. And the administration did literally nothing and refused, even when I offered, I'm a registered volunteer with the district. I'm like, if you need extra hands on the playground, I will be there. I am here to support this being safe, and was just absolutely stonewalled. And to me, when my kindergartner is coming home black and blue and subjected to slurs around their identity, and the administration says, there's nothing we can do, there's nothing we're going to do, that to me I would call negligence.
And so what does the gender inclusion policy include that will give you more tools?
So I think there's 2 kind of major important pieces in the gender inclusion policy. I mean, there's many good pieces with it, but there's two kind of major pieces. The first major piece is that it requires continual ongoing education for staff.
That's so huge.
This is huge. This does not exist in most other gender inclusion policies. And this is something that we thought was really important, because when we have asked for school-based or even district-based kind of continuing education, sometimes it'll happen and sometimes it won't. And sometimes the education that's given is so basic, it's like, how is that helpful for anyone? Or it was presented in a way that, like, you know, isn't understandable. And so having continuing education was really important, because as we know, kind of our understanding of what is gender expression changes. As language changes, as our ability to understand changes, right? And so even the most kind of well-intentioned individuals need to make sure that their language and their understanding is being updated. So that's a huge piece. And then the second huge piece, which...
Facilities!
Yes, the bathrooms.
It's really about providing equitable access at school, so that we don't have kids who are peeing their pants, or who are shut out of participating in sports, or who are constantly...
Or other activities. It doesn't even have to be sports. It can be leadership things that are just for boys or just for girls,
right? Or teachers who say, okay, we're doing an exercise. I want the boys on one side and the girls on the other, right? And it's just a constant reminder to your child that nobody believes that they exist or nobody wants them.
I'm just going to sit with that a minute. Whew.
That is literally what my 6-year-old has come home crying. Those are the words from my 6-year-old. Nobody wants me. Nobody believes I exist.
Where am I supposed to go?
Yeah.
There's these moments when I'm talking to people where I get a wash of goosebumps when it feels like deep meaning, and that was one of those moments. I'm sorry to both of you that your children have had to hold that.
It's a lot for a real little kid.
It's a lot.
It's especially hard. Like for me, you know, I'm somebody, I consider myself to be agender. And like, that was something that I didn't get to come to until adulthood, because there wasn't language for that when we were kids.
Which
it was
is
just
so
like,
key.
I'm bad at being a girl, I guess. Right. And so, you know, for my child has grown up in an environment where, blessed, they have been able to be around non-binary and gender expansive people their whole life. So for them, from their perspective, it feels really normal in a way that is not normal for people of our age, right? And that's beautiful.
That is
I'm
beautiful.
so grateful for that. But it also makes the sting of rejection that much harder for them to comprehend.
I think there's like, it reminds me of the way that we so intentionally built our house to be full of celebrating Blackness.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So
that's exactly it.
So that when I remember, I had a mentor who said, your living room has like Black folks make their home like a safe space. It is like it's like the place where you can go like, and you have to create that.
Yes.
Right.
You have to be intentional.
You have to be intentional. And so, the goal in our home was like that they would be so fully enveloped in who they were that when they went out into the world, it was like there was a deep knowing.
Yeah.
Or
and
a bubble of protection.
That's true for queer people as well.
Yeah.
I think that's true for anyone whose identity puts them at odds with the outside world.
Oh, yes. And what you said it when we were talking before we started. Just Claire, go back to your line about the patriarchy.
I think that was Anna's line about the patriarchy.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I said was that, like, you know, there's people who like to do whataboutisms or both sides around issues of literal kindergartners and first graders having access to a bathroom where they feel safe. And there just isn't an argument against that isn't rooted in patriarchal norms. There just isn't.
And heteronormative norms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, oh my gosh, if they're in a bathroom with stalls and the stalls don't go to the floor, what if somebody peeks under the door? what if somebody peeks under the door now?
Yes.
You're assuming that
Yes.
there are only heterosexual
Yes.
children in your school. This is not an issue of it's not safe. This is an issue of teach people appropriate, respectful boundaries,
Yes.
which we should be doing anyway.
And we can
Yes.
do that beyond, it actually expands the scope to be able to do that.
Yes.
Well, and this is one of the things that Claire always says that I just have to second, which is that when we make access better for people who are in marginalized groups,
Yes.
we make access better for everyone.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So in other words, it doesn't limit anything.
No.
It
No.
only expands our
Yes.
understanding of ourselves more and more. Okay, so tell me, how did you start? Like, I remember as a new parent in this district going to my first board meeting and being like, I have no idea. I don't feel like I belong. I don't know who to meet with. I don't know what to do, but I knew I had a fire in my belly. And so, like, can you just talk a little bit about, like, your journey for working on this policy and what worked, what didn't?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, right. So my partner has been in Minneapolis Public Schools for 13 years, 14 years. Right. So I had experience prior to our kids being born or even being in Minneapolis Public Schools from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So being familiar with the board, being familiar with policies, being familiar with kind of personnel didn't feel daunting. What felt daunting was like knowing, right? Like I knew Anna before this because our kids go to the same school. But kind of connecting with other families across the district who had similar situations. And I don't mean situations like kids, but like similar experiences or similar needs. And so I think figuring out how to connect with those folks so that we could work all together, right? Because that's when you get stuff done, not like an individual, but as like a community response.
Well, and I think I can speak a little bit to that sense of being an outsider and not knowing where to start, because when I got into this work, Claire was basically the only person that I knew, because we were brand new in the district and brand new in the city. And so my Rolodex of people to call was like, you know?
Yeah.
So for me, I think that fire in the belly that you were talking about is actually the most important part, because when you have that fire in the belly, it motivates you to do the work. And when you start doing the work, and especially when you start doing the work publicly, like, for me, a lot of the advocacy started with the first school board meeting that I attended and spoke at. And I told the story of what happened to my child. And
Wait, was that November meeting the first one you had ever gone to?
it was.
Oh my gosh.
And so, like, speaking about that, like, and it takes a willingness to be vulnerable in front of people.
Totally.
And that's a really hard lift for some people, and I want to acknowledge that. But if you can get past that, and make yourself vulnerable and speak publicly about the issues that you're having, people will find you.
Yeah.
They will. They will come up and
Yep.
talk to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
the other big piece I would say is whatever your issue is, like, we have this sense, because we live in such an individualistic society, that like we all have to do this work on our own, or like we have to start from scratch. And I would really encourage people to realize and to do the research and look around you, because there are people who are already working on whatever issue it is. So you don't have to start from scratch. Like, part of what made us so successful in this process is that we had the help of Outfront and we had the help of Transforming Families.
Yep.
And both of these are organizations who have been doing this work in the state for a while. And so we didn't have to start
Had just
from,
helped Duluth pass
Right.
their gender inclusion policy.
Exactly. So they had a playbook already built.
Wait,
And
but we were behind Duluth?
Yes.
Yep.
We were
Okay.
behind Duluth.
Okay.
We're behind Oakdale. We're behind a whole bunch of schools.
We're behind Hopkins. We're behind, So I think understanding that you're not actually alone, that there are people in the community who are already doing this work, and that if you have that fire and that passion and you're willing to reach out and to do some organizing around it, that you will find your people, and more importantly, your people will find you.
Okay, so did you ever deal with imposter syndrome?
I mean,
I was raised female. Of course I have imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. That was what I was going to say too. I mean, and for me, like my professional background started working in audio, and audio is a field where when I entered it 20 years ago, it was 7% female, and it is still 7% female. It is so male dominated. So for me, if I allowed that sense of you don't belong here to stop me from doing the work that I want to do, I would never get anything done. So at this point, it's one of those things where like, do I feel it? Of course I feel it. But I like being underestimated because it makes the win more fun.
Okay. All right. Did you feel imposter syndrome along the way?
Not necessarily with this. I felt pretty confident in my skills and mostly annoyed by other people not catching up.
Well, and Claire and I got really lucky here in terms of trying to organize this project together, because Claire's a lawyer and I'm a project manager. So we have really complementary skills. We have really complementary ideas about how we want things to go. And we were able to build a really solid partnership between the two of us that allowed us each to play to our own strengths and each to sort of take on the work that was most comfortable for us and build a partnership that worked really well. Like I stepped into it kind of feeling like I'm just gonna hang back because I'm new and let this all, see where I fit in. And like, we started out like rotating who led the meetings, and after the first meeting I led, everyone was like, would you please just do this from now on? And I was like, yes, absolutely, thank you, I will. So I think finding good partners to work with. And
well, it also helps that we're both extroverts,
yeah,
right? So we can go up to people and be like, hey, let's talk.
Right.
Yeah. Did you find that like when parts of it got heavy, you would try to pass it off like, oh, this part is feeling really heavy for me? Like for me, I think one of the things I've been really working on this year is like doing what feeds me and trying to really figure out the things that tax me, because you know what I mean? And just really thinking about that more, where there are times where you were like, actually, this is not my strength. This is my strength along that journey, that you were able to toss it back and forth to each other? Or did you come into your roles pretty easily?
I think we came into it pretty easily. I think, whenever things got heavy, it was really easy to be like, okay, but if I can take this heaviness off of my kid.
Oh my God.
And if I can take that, right?
Yes.
Like I'm a cisgender person. Allow me to use that privilege to take that off of my child, because there is no way that a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old should have to advocate at that level for themselves.
Right.
Let alone a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old or any of the ages.
Yep. Like we can, one of my favorite people says we can do hard things for kids.
Yep.
Right.
That's
absolutely.
it.
We can do hard things for kids.
And I think for me too, I think it was exactly the opposite, which is part of like what I do in sort of movement building or community building, which is to say, like, I have that fire in my belly and I have that skin in the game that makes me want to push through when it's hard, that other people don't have. So I'm looking at my team and I'm trying to delegate work based on what other people have capacity for or have passion for or have space for, and then I will clean up and take on whatever the grunt work or the hard work or the miserable work is that nobody else wants to do, because I have that skin in the game that makes me want to push through.
That's right.
And that makes it a lot easier to build community when you really like look at people for who they are and for who their strengths are, and you try to meet them where they are and you try and give them ways to participate that are comfortable for them or that feel good to them. Then it makes it a lot easier to build your team.
That's leadership, right?
Yeah.
And we had other parents who they didn't publicly speak, but they helped us in drafting emails and showing up to meetings, right? And so like that's where their strengths and like spoon capability came in. And so that's what you want to look for.
Right.
So I was going to ask a different question, and now I want to change it. So my question was going to be like, how will you hold the district accountable for implementation? But now when you named that you needed your child not to hold that, what I found myself is like, actually, this is my job too. So how can our community, how can other MPS parents keep that burden off of your children with that? Like, what are ideas for, like, my children right now identify as the sex they were born in, right? But how do I, as a parent, help the district be accountable for every child in this district and not children, like, right? Like, and then how do we work on that as my children are Black? And like, so how do we like create this framework where I'm not just holding Blackness and you're not just holding your children, like, but like
intersectionality is the name of the game.
How do I support you in this?
Well, I think what we're doing right here, right now is actually a big part of it. Like if you look at my notes for how I was going to answer that question, one of the things I was going to say is thank you for having us on today. Because I think one of the important pieces is just making people aware. Yep. You can't hold a principal or a teacher accountable to a policy you don't know exists.
Okay. Yep.
So for me, like the first step is let's make sure that there is not a living, breathing soul in Minneapolis who does not know that this exists.
And they understand what it says.
Yes.
So they can't push back and say we're already in compliance without having read the new gender inclusion policy to say, oh, actually, you're not in compliance with it because you're not changing signs for bathrooms.
Right. So, yeah, I think educating people about what this policy is and what it guarantees is really important. I think another piece that's really important is really just like the way that we treat all children, right?
Yes.
And so, you know, one of the things that I do with my child in trying to raise an anti-racist person is our house is also full of stories and books that have, you know, Black characters and that celebrate Blackness and all of that kind of stuff, because that is part of the world that we live in. And that's something that I want my child to appreciate.
Yes.
So I think it's really important for families that don't have a transgender or a non-binary child or don't yet know that they have a transgender and non-binary child to normalize this in your home, to just make this a normal part of society, right? And one of the things that I'm sure you can relate to as a parent of Black children is that so much of the literature around these issues is what I would call trauma porn.
Totally.
Yes.
And so,
totally.
Like for example, we have a book that I bought for my child that's just about that's not about queer representation, but is queer representation. A really silly little children's book called Bay the Cat, where the family happens to have two dads, and that is never mentioned and it's never discussed. It's just normal.
It's just there.
Because it is just normal. This
Yes.
is the world we're living in. And to pretend that by just closing your child's eyes to this, it doesn't exist, that doesn't help your child. It doesn't help my child. Or not wanting to
talk about it.
Right, exactly. You cannot.
Because they can't understand.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think a huge thing that we all can do as parents is just to live in a pluralistic society and raise our children in a pluralistic society and acknowledge that there are so many ways of being and so many experiences that people have that are different from our own, and that's not a problem. That's part of what makes our culture and our country and our city wonderful and vibrant and interesting.
Well, and I think too, like, playing off of where you have privilege to support other people, right? That's something that I'm constantly talking about with my 6 and 9-year-old, right? So my 6-year-old, who's a cisgender boy, right? I'm like, hey, use your privilege. If somebody is misgendering your older sibling, or if somebody is insulting them or making fun of them, you step in and you say, that's not okay. Those aren't their pronouns. That isn't their name. That's not okay. And it's the same for my potentially neurotypical 9-year-old to step in when their younger brother who's autistic is getting made fun of, right? It's that same thing. So whether your privilege is based on race or gender or orientation or ability or class, right? Whatever it is, we all have different privileges, but many have marginalized identities as part of that too, right? So fitting that together, and when you are experiencing or seeing or hearing something, you need to say something.
Right. I'm always going to raise my children to protect your children. And I hope that we're all doing that, because nothing, like, that's how societies change, is when we decide that whatever nonsense we were given by the generation above us stops with us. Right? There's real power to being an intergenerational trauma breaker and to saying, you know what? It doesn't matter how I was raised. It doesn't matter what I was taught. I am going, like, my child is so ferocious, is such, and
they are like a lion.
But they have discovered that using that ferocity for good is like it's a magic superpower. And so now they identify as the defender, and they're going around looking for ways to defend others. And that, like, as a parent, that's just like, oh my gosh, I couldn't be more proud of you. Like, holy cow, right? And we all have different strengths and weaknesses. And it's right back to the conversation we were having around team building. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. And so seeing and respecting each other for those, and then knowing ourselves and using our own points of privilege, our own strengths, to be able to be defenders in our community of the people who need defense. Like it is that intersectionality.
Or providing the space for them to do it.
Right.
Right? We don't need to speak for them.
No.
But if we can, step aside, if we can
Make
create
it safe
the
for
space,
them to say those things, right?
provide the microphone to amplify their voice.
Growl at anyone who's trying to steal it away from them if you're my child.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Sure.
So one of the things that happens to me every single time I'm at the doctor with my children or in really intimate moments is that our relationship is questioned. Mm-hmm. Right? So imagine.
Or the validity of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so imagine, like I remember my children were getting ready for surgery and there were 4. And, you're so nervous, right? And so the nurse comes in and says, my sister's always wanted to adopt. Where are they from? Right? And so in these really, really intimate moments of parenting, I'm alone in the room. Mm-hmm. And I'm now deciding if I'm going to manage the question or manage my children's comfort or what part I can live with. So a question that I've been getting stuck on lately that I would just really like you to help me with the answer is, when I ask you about your children, like when I say, how old are your children? How many do you have? The next thing, boys or girls.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I know that is not, I recognize that that's not healthy. I need you to tell me how to ask that question.
Well, I mean, I think we should take a step back and ask whether that's really an important question.
Okay,
right?
That's fair.
Because I think
are we
as
just
a society,
doing routines and we don't need them anymore?
We're talk about old patterns that we can toss, right?
Okay.
If there's a legitimate reason to ask the question, I don't know if there is, but if there is, you can say, what are the genders of your children? Right? But I think more we should normalize the idea that who cares? What does gender tell us about somebody? Like, why is that? If I tell you I have a girl, does that mean that you're going to assume that they like princesses and ponies and whatever? Right? Like this question is a precursor or a dog whistle for assumptions that we're going to make that are not. That should not be the assumptions that we make in the year of our Lord 2024.
Okay.
What I love answering is, how old are my kids?
Yeah.
And what are their names?
And maybe like, what are they interested in?
Yes.
Okay. I like that. So that's super, super helpful because I found myself messing this up. Right. And I want to do better. So I'm really glad to know that. And I would also say one of the ways that folks can ask me about my children is they can just say like, hey, mom, like that, right? Like that's a real easy thing to do. And then that's all you really need to know. I was thinking about this. If the person who was putting my child under sedation and taking their tonsils out didn't need to know where they were from, you didn't need to either, nurse. But anyways, okay, let's talk about this. MPS has left an imprint on all of us. For real, this district, I say this all the time. I love to hate it. I hate to love it. I love it. There are such beautiful people in this district. And my children have learned so many pieces about who they are because they've been in it. And so what, as we leave, what's one thing you want to say, one impression this district's left on you? Doesn't have to be positive. Doesn't have to be negative.
I can share 2 if it's okay.
Sure,
one that is really negative and one that's really positive.
Okay.
So, for me, I think like a catalyzing moment for me as a parent in the district that set me on the path that I am, that landed me in the seat today, is having a first meeting with the principal when my child has come home black and blue and saying, what can we do? What are you going to do to keep my kids safe? What are we going to change about this? And just being stonewalled, no. And then looking at my crying kindergartner who's looking at me saying, Mommy, I'm scared. I don't want to go to school. And watching the principal literally lean over my child and say, oh, sweetheart, you don't have a choice. Everyone has to go to school. Like that felt just absolutely like something out of a Roald Dahl novel to me, right? You know, like that was just, I was so absolutely just shocked to my core that I couldn't even respond in the moment, but you better believe I did.
I do.
Yeah. Anyone who knows me knows I don't just not respond. But anyway, the other moment that was just absolutely brought me to tears was my child is single-sided deaf, so they have an IEP. And when we got into Marcy and did some evaluation around, you know, what do we want in this IEP? How are we going to support this student? You know, what does this child need? Sitting at a table full of these really bright and brilliant and diverse educators and listening to each one of them talk with such love and reverence and joy about who my child was and what they wanted to do to support them, like literally brought me to tears. It's bringing me to tears just thinking about it. There are so many beautiful, passionate educators doing just absolutely incredible work who are really genuinely seeing our kids and really genuinely trying to support them for who they are. And that, like, it brings me to tears.
Yep. Yeah. I could tell a story, but it's not my turn. Claire.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, having your kid come home and say, where do I belong? How do I fit in? They said I wasn't existing. They told me that those weren't my pronouns, right? Like, that is heartbreaking. But then, right, when you hear stories of a sibling or a friend stepping in and saying, well, actually, let me tell you, right? Like, I think the beautiful thing about Minneapolis Public Schools is the community that exists, right? Within the classrooms, within the schools, within the neighborhoods. And that, yeah.
And I think, like, sometimes we're just a little messier because we're all right up next to everybody else. And I would rather have that than, like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I love our mess.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, I think the benefit of the mess too is, like, life is messy and all of these interconnected identities and relationships are messy.
Yeah.
And when we live all up next to each other and we have to work these issues out together, we are able to be close enough to see one another's humanity, right? And so much of the rhetoric, I think about race, about trans children, about any of these issues that are divisive, is really an issue of so many of these people are able to hold bigoted beliefs because they believe that they don't know anyone meaningfully within that community. And so
that's exactly
that is how, you know, damaging stereotypes flourish in darkness, right? And so when we live next to each other, you can reach out to me and say, hey, this is something I feel awkward about, and maybe I'm not going to say this right, but, like, how should I ask? Is it a boy or a girl or whatever? How do I address that? And I can say, hey, you know what? Here's a way you can address it if you need to, but also why do you need to, right? And in the same way, like, you know, we can share these experiences. And when I know you and you know me,
that's right,
we can give each other the leeway to get it wrong. We can call each other in and find better solutions together. And we can muddle through the mess as colleagues, as friends, as community members, as people who care for each other. And it's building, it all comes back to building those relationships, right? And that's at the core, that should be at the core of everything that we're trying to do.
Well, and providing representation for our kids.
Yeah.
Right? So they can see, like, a beautiful trans teacher in their classroom, right? Or a Black math teacher at high school, or whatever the case may be. But, like, they can see themselves or parts of themselves within the district rather than, like, it all being the exact same level of vanilla.
Right.
Well, I just want to thank you both as a parent, as a fellow parent in this district. Thank you for your work. Thank you for dedicating the hours of time to this policy. I'm sorry you had to do it. I'm sorry we didn't just show up for your kids. And I'm so looking forward to the many ways that we can continue to partner together to make sure your babies are safe in school.
And likewise.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.